Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at the Bible's guidance on two big topics:
Okay.
serving God faithfully and navigating the complexities of marriage and divorce.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know what you might be thinking, those seem pretty different.
Uh-huh.
But as I was going through the source material,
Right.
I realized they both offer really interesting perspectives
That's
on
interesting.
building and maintaining important relationships.
Yeah.
The section on serving God faithfully was packed with practical tips, but I have to admit, the part
Mm-hmm.
about marriage and divorce left me with a lot more questions than answers.
Oh, really?
That's why I'm thrilled to have our expert here today
Hey.
to help us unpack these teachings and figure out how they might apply to our lives.
Awesome.
Speaking of those practical tips for serving God,
Okay.
one that really stood out to me was the idea of discovering your spiritual gifts
Oh, yeah.
and using them to serve others.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
It's a fascinating concept, isn't it?
Yeah.
Imagine if each of us had like unique talents or abilities
Right.
that we could use to make a positive impact on the world around us.
Mm-hmm.
The source material suggests that everybody has these gifts,
Okay.
whether it's a knack for teaching, a passion for helping those in need,
Mm-hmm.
or even something as simple as like bringing joy to others through music or art.
That makes me think about my friend who's an incredible baker.
Oh, wow.
Her cakes could seriously bring world peace.
Yeah.
But seriously,
Wow.
it's a cool idea to consider how our passions and talents
Right.
could be used in service to something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that the source material doesn't just focus on using these gifts for religious purposes.
Oh, interesting.
It emphasizes serving others in general, which could mean volunteering in your community,
Mm-hmm.
supporting a cause you believe in, or simply being there for a friend in need.
So even if someone isn't particularly religious, this idea of identifying your strengths and using them to make a positive impact is still relevant.
Absolutely. It's about tapping into your potential and contributing to something meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected and that our actions can have a ripple effect on others.
I love that. It's like we're all part of this giant web,
Yeah.
and even the smallest acts of kindness or service can create positive vibrations that spread outward.
Mhm.
Another point that struck me was the emphasis on staying faithful in small things.
Okay.
It's easy to get caught up in grand gestures or big accomplishments,
Right.
but sometimes it's the everyday actions,
Yeah.
the seemingly insignificant choices
Yeah.
that truly demonstrate our commitment to our values.
That's a powerful insight. And it reminds me of the saying, character is what you do when no one is watching.
Oh, yeah.
It's about consistency, integrity,
Mm-hmm.
and living in alignment with your beliefs, even when no one is giving you a pat on the back.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that. I've been trying to be more mindful about little things lately, like being fully present when I'm talking to someone or making an effort to put my phone away during meals.
Well, yeah.
It's amazing how those small shifts can make a big difference in how I feel and how I interact with others.
It sounds like you're already experiencing the power of those small acts of faithfulness.
Yeah.
And that's a key takeaway from this section of the source material.
Okay.
It's not about achieving some grand, unattainable level of perfection,
Right.
but about consistently making choices that reflect your values and deepen your connection to something larger than yourself.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about cultivating a way of life,
Yeah.
a way of being,
Yeah.
rather than just checking off a list of good deeds.
Precisely. And that brings us to an important point.
Okay.
The source material emphasizes that serving God faithfully isn't about blindly following rules or performing ritual.
Right.
It's about nurturing a deep, ongoing relationship.
Okay. I'm really intrigued by that idea of relationship.
Mhm.
How does the source material describe that connection between humans and God?
It uses the metaphor of a covenant,
Yeah.
which is more than just a contract or agreement.
Uh-huh.
It's a sacred bond built on love, loyalty, and commitment.
So when we talk about serving God faithfully,
Right.
we're essentially talking about honoring that covenant,
Exactly.
living in right relationship with him.
Exactly. And the how-to list we've been discussing is like a guidebook for cultivating that relationship.
Oh, interesting.
It's about aligning our hearts, minds, and actions with what we believe to be God's will.
That makes me wonder, is this concept of a covenant relationship just a religious idea, or could it apply to other areas of our lives as well?
That's a great question, and I think the answer is both.
Okay.
While the concept of a covenant originates in religious contexts, the underlying principles of commitment, loyalty, and love
Yeah.
are certainly applicable to our human relationships as well.
Now that we've explored how to cultivate our relationship with God,
Right.
let's dive into how those principles might apply to our most important human relationship,
Okay.
marriage. The source material dives deep into this, highlighting marriage as a sacred covenant established by God.
Yes.
It even outlines 3 key purposes for this union.
And those purposes? Companionship, procreation, and reflecting God's relationship with the church
Okay.
offer a fascinating glimpse into the social and religious context of biblical times.
Mm-hmm.
Companionship emphasized mutual support within marriage.
Right.
Procreation was essential for societal growth. And reflecting God's relationship with the church underscored the spiritual significance of the union.
So these purposes help us understand how marriage was viewed in that time period.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, I'm curious about how those purposes might be interpreted in today's world. After all, things have evolved quite a bit, and the way we view marriage and relationships is definitely different now.
You're absolutely right. It's important to acknowledge that historical context as we try to apply these teachings to our lives today.
Okay.
And that leads us to another interesting point. The source material outlines specific roles for husbands and wives within marriage.
Yes, and I was particularly struck by that section.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on those roles?
Oh, okay.
Especially considering how much our understanding of gender roles has changed over time?
This raises an important question about how we interpret ancient texts in a modern context.
Mm-hmm.
In biblical times, these roles were often understood in a hierarchical sense,
Right.
with the husband as the head of the household.
Uh-huh.
However, many contemporary interpretations emphasize mutuality and partnership within marriage,
Okay.
while still acknowledging distinct roles based on individual strengths and gifts.
That makes sense. It's like we're trying to bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and modern sensibilities.
Yeah.
We're looking for the timeless truths that resonate across generations,
Right.
while also acknowledging the need for evolving interpretations.
Exactly. And that leads us to a topic that often generates a lot of discussion and debate:
Okay.
divorce.
Yeah, this was the part that really had me scratching my head.
Oh, really?
The source material makes a strong statement.
Okay.
God hates divorce.
Right.
But then it goes on to list permissible grounds for divorce.
Yeah.
And that's where things got really interesting for me.
It's a complex issue, and I think it's important to approach this section with both sensitivity and a willingness to grapple with the nuances.
Absolutely. So let's dive into those nuances in part 2 of our deep dive.
Yeah.
We'll explore those permissible grounds for divorce, and we'll tackle the big question.
Mm-hmm.
How do we interpret these ancient teachings in a way that is both faithful and relevant to our lives today?
Okay.
Stay tuned. Welcome back to the deep dive. We're unpacking some pretty weighty topics today, and I'm ready to get back to those permissible grounds for divorce.
Okay.
You know, where we left off, I was really struck by the contrast between that strong statement, God hates divorce,
Mm-hmm.
and then the acknowledgement that there are actually situations where it's allowed.
It definitely highlights the tension between upholding a sacred covenant like marriage
Right,
and recognizing the complexities of human relationships.
right. And the source material specifically mentions 2 grounds.
Yeah.
Sexual immorality and abandonment by an unbelieving spouse.
Right.
Let's start with sexual immorality. I'm curious, how is that defined within the context of the Bible?
In this context, sexual immorality generally refers to adultery,
Uh-huh.
which is considered a violation of the marital covenant.
Right.
It's seen as a betrayal of trust and a breach of that sacred bond between husband and wife.
That makes sense, especially given how much emphasis the source material places on marriage being a covenant.
Exactly. Adultery undermines the very foundation of that covenant.
Okay.
But then we have the other ground, abandonment by an unbelieving spouse.
Yeah.
This one seems much more nuanced, especially from our modern perspective.
Right.
Can you shed some light on the historical context surrounding this?
You know, that's the one that really threw me for a loop. I can see how infidelity breaks that covenant of marriage.
Uh-huh.
But abandonment by an unbeliever, that feels very specific to the time period. What was going on back then that would make this such a significant issue?
Remember, during the time when the Bible was written, early Christians were often living in societies where their faith was a minority view,
Okay.
sometimes even facing persecution for their beliefs.
Right.
In these situations, a Christian might be abandoned by their non-Christian spouse due to those beliefs.
So it wasn't necessarily about the spouse simply leaving,
Right.
but about the pressure and potential danger that came with being abandoned because of your faith.
That's a key piece of the puzzle.
Wow.
It wasn't just about the relationship ending. It was about the added layer of social isolation
Right.
and potential persecution that a Christian might face in those circumstances.
Wow, that really adds a whole new dimension to this. It makes me think about the different kinds of pressure people face in relationships today, even if it's not outright persecution.
Yeah,
Like maybe someone's partner is constantly pressuring them to compromise their values or beliefs.
that's a great point.
Yeah.
While we may not face the same kind of persecution as early Christians,
Yeah. Right.
we can still find ourselves in situations where our fundamental values or beliefs are in conflict with those of our partners.
Okay, so we've got this historical context,
Right.
but how do these grounds for divorce translate to our world today?
Yeah.
The world is obviously a very different place than it was back then.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
While the specific circumstances may differ, the underlying principles can still offer guidance.
Okay.
The core issue, as the source material highlights, is whether the grounds for divorce fundamentally violate the covenant of marriage.
So it's not about a rigid set of rules,
Right.
but about understanding the spirit of the law, so to speak.
Yes, it's about looking at the heart of the matter.
Okay.
Is there a breach of trust?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a violation of the commitment that forms the very basis of the marriage covenant?
Right.
This leads many contemporary theologians and scholars to view infidelity and abuse, for example,
Right.
as valid grounds for divorce.
That makes sense to me because in those situations, the foundation of the relationship has been damaged, maybe even irreparably.
Exactly. In those cases, divorce, while never ideal, might be considered the most compassionate and just course of action.
Okay.
However, it's crucial to remember that the source material still emphasizes seeking reconciliation and forgiveness whenever possible.
So divorce is not something to be taken lightly,
Right.
but a last resort after all other avenues have been explored.
Yes, exactly. It's
Yeah.
about recognizing that even in the midst of pain and brokenness, there's always hope for healing and restoration.
And even when divorce does happen, the source material seems to offer a message of hope, right? It's
Yeah.
not about condemnation, but about the possibility of finding grace and redemption.
That's one of the most powerful takeaways for me.
Yeah.
The Bible is full of stories of second chances,
Right.
of finding forgiveness and starting anew.
Mm.
No matter what we've been through, no matter what mistakes we've made, there's always a path back to wholeness.
I think that's such an important reminder because divorce often carries so much shame and stigma.
Yeah,
Can feel like a failure, like a permanent mark against you.
right.
But the message here is that it's not the end of the story.
Exactly.
There's still hope, there's still love, and there's still a way to move forward.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
It's a message that resonates not just with those who've experienced divorce,
Right.
but with all of us who have ever felt broken, lost, or unworthy of love.
Mm-hmm.
Because let's face it, none of us are perfect. We all make mistakes. We all fall short.
Right.
And we all need that reminder that forgiveness and second chances are possible.
And that brings us to the big question.
Okay.
How do we interpret these ancient teachings in a way that feels both faithful and relevant to our lives today?
That's the challenge, isn't it?
Really?
We live in a world so different from the one in which the Bible was written.
Yeah.
Our social norms, our understanding of gender roles, the way we approach relationships,
Right.
all of these things have evolved significantly.
So how do we bridge that gap? How do we make these ancient teachings come alive in a way that speaks to our modern experiences?
I think it starts with acknowledging that tension between the ancient and the modern.
Okay.
We can't simply ignore the historical context, but we also can't pretend that our world hasn't changed.
Right.
It's about finding that balance between respecting the wisdom of tradition and recognizing the need for evolving interpretations.
It's like we're standing on the shoulders of those who came before us, trying to see further than they could while still honoring their legacy.
Exactly.
Mm.
And that requires a willingness to engage in thoughtful dialogue, to ask tough questions, and to be open to different perspectives.
Mm.
It's not about blindly following rules, but about seeking understanding and wisdom.
It's about recognizing that faith is a journey, not a destination.
Right.
And it's a journey we don't have to take alone. We can learn from each other, we can challenge each other, and we can support each other as we grapple with these complex issues.
That's the beauty of community, isn't
Yeah.
it? We
Yeah.
can share our struggles, our doubts, and our insights, knowing that we're not alone in this search for meaning and truth.
And that's what we're trying to do here on the Deep Dive.
Exactly.
To create a space for open and honest conversation,
Yeah,
to
right.
wrestle with these big questions together, and
Right.
to find ways to make these ancient teachings relevant to our lives today.
Okay.
So as we move into the final part of our deep dive,
Great.
let's continue this exploration with curiosity, compassion, and a willingness to learn from each other. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've journeyed through some intense territory, exploring the Bible's teachings on faithful service,
Mm-hmm.
delving into the complexities of marriage and divorce.
Yeah.
Now, in this final part, I'm curious,
Mm-hmm.
what are some key takeaways, some practical insights our listeners can carry with them from all this?
One thing that keeps echoing in my mind is this concept of covenant relationships.
Oh, yeah.
It's been woven throughout our entire conversation, hasn't it?
It really has. It started with serving God faithfully,
Right.
then became this lens through which we viewed marriage.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sensing it goes even broader than that.
You're picking up on something crucial there.
Okay.
Whether we're talking about our relationship with God,
Right.
our romantic partnerships, friendships, family,
Mm-hmm.
even our commitments to our community.
Mm-hmm.
That idea of a covenant
Yeah.
calls us to a deeper level.
Yeah.
It's not just fulfilling obligations,
Right.
but nurturing a bond built on mutual respect, trust, and a shared sense of purpose.
That makes me think about, well, for me, it's volunteer work.
Okay.
I help out at a local animal shelter.
Oh, wow.
And it's easy to just show up, clean kennels, walk dogs.
Yeah.
But when I view it as this covenant, like I've made a promise to these animals to care for them, it changes everything.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
It's not just a task, it's an act rooted in deeper values.
Right.
And that ripple effect you mentioned earlier,
Mm.
it applies here too.
Yeah, okay.
You treating those animals with that level of care.
Right.
It impacts the shelter staff, potential adopters,
Yeah.
even the community as a whole.
Wow. I hadn't thought about it like that before.
Yeah.
And speaking of impact,
Uh-huh.
another takeaway that really resonated with me was that emphasis on seeking reconciliation and forgiveness,
Right.
especially within the context of marriage and divorce.
It's a theme that goes straight to the heart of what it means to be human, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We're all flawed, we all make mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
and we all need forgiveness at some point.
Right.
The Bible reminds us that God's forgiveness is always available to us,
Yeah.
but it also challenges us to extend that same grace to others,
Mm.
even when it's incredibly difficult.
That's so true. It makes me think of a quote I heard once.
Okay.
Forgiveness is giving up the hope that the past could be any different.
Oh, wow.
It's not about condoning hurtful actions,
Right?
but about choosing to release the anger and resentment that keep us stuck in pain.
That's beautifully said.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that holding on to bitterness
Mm-hmm.
hurts us more than anyone else.
Right.
And, this idea of forgiveness isn't just for those who have gone through divorce. It's relevant to all of our relationships.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've all been hurt by someone, and we've all probably hurt others intentionally or not.
Right.
Learning to forgive both ourselves and others is essential for moving forward and creating healthy, fulfilling relationships.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, before we wrap up, I'd love to touch on the practical side of serving God faithfully.
Okay.
The source material outlined 10 steps. And while they were rooted in a religious context, I think there's a lot there that can resonate even if you don't identify as religious.
Absolutely. Remember that idea of discovering your spiritual gifts.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing your unique talents and passions
Mm-hmm.
and finding ways to use them to make a positive impact in the world.
Mm-hmm.
It could be through volunteering, creative expression,
Right.
mentoring,
Right.
or simply being a supportive friend or a family member.
And it doesn't have to be some grand sweeping gesture. Sometimes it's the small everyday actions that make the biggest difference.
Exactly.
Mm.
It's about cultivating that attitude of service, of
Yeah.
looking for opportunities to contribute, to make someone's day a little brighter, to leave the world a little better than you found it.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've
Oh.
explored some challenging topics, unpacked some complex teachings, and hopefully provided some food for thought for our listener.
It's been a truly enriching conversation.
It really has.
And for those listening, remember that the Bible is a rich tapestry,
Okay.
woven with stories, teachings, and wisdom that have resonated across centuries.
It's a book that invites us to engage with it on multiple levels, to wrestle with its complexities and to find meaning and relevance within its pages.
And as you continue your own exploration of these topics,
Mhm.
I encourage you to approach them with curiosity, compassion, and an open mind.
Because at the end of the day, whether you're seeking to deepen your faith, strengthen your relationships, or simply live a more purposeful life,
Yeah.
the journey itself is where the real transformation happens.
So keep seeking, keep questioning, keep growing.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.